All right, welcome everybody. My name is Delaney McWalters. I am a marketing consultant doing some work with Lupus Foundation of New England, and I get to have conversations with great members of our community. And one of those people that I'm speaking with today is Dr. Lloyd Klickstein, and he is a researcher, a rheumatologist, and a board member over at our foundation. So, Dr. Klickstein, I'll let you introduce yourself a little bit more.
Thank you very much. I'm happy to be here with you. So, as you heard, my name is Lloyd Klickstein. I'm a board member of the Lupus Foundation of New England, have been for decades. Was introduced to the foundation in the late 70s or early 80s by Dr. Peter Schur, who was one of the founding physicians of our organization. And I've been involved in one form or another ever since. As you heard from Delaney, I wear several hats in the field of lupus generally. I'm a rheumatologist trained at Brigham and Women's Hospital. I no longer practice medicine. I now instead invent new medicines for lupus as well as other diseases. And I'm mostly occupied working in companies to develop these medicines, but also serve as a consultant to others. And I'm glad to be able to continue to contribute, even as my wife reminds me, theoretically a senior citizen.
Age is just a number.
Right.
Yeah, and we appreciate you being here today. So you said that you invent new medicines for treating lupus. That feels very very grand, I guess. It feels we talked to one other researcher as part of this interview series, and I guess just tell me more about that. Like, what does that process look like? What is that? Are you in a lab? Are you consulting? Like, what does that look like on your end?
Right. So the bigger question that you're asking is, where do new medicines come from? And it is obviously a job for many people. I like to tell my teams that making a new medicine is a bigger project than a skyscraper in New York. It takes more people, more money, and more time to make a medicine than to build the Empire State Building. That said, how does it happen? So things begin and hopefully end with patients. So we have to understand what the symptoms are, what bothers them, what makes people feel sick. We have to then understand the biology and the medicine that underlies those things. A lot of this work comes from doctors and patients working with each other to understand the disease, scientists in the laboratory doing some of the basic work to better understand the biology underlying both health and disease. And then as the knowledge emerges, people like me now, as a drug developer, we integrate all of this knowledge and then essentially do the drug engineering to say, well, how could we, understanding the problem, potentially fix it or make it more tolerable? And this is where new medicines come from. And sometimes we invent them in the laboratory. Sometimes we take them from other fields of medicine and apply them in lupus. There's a pretty good history of that in rheumatology. I think many of the listeners will know about methotrexate, which was originally a drug developed for cancer and then applied very successfully in rheumatology for various forms of arthritis, for example. And we're going to talk a little more about one of those other examples, because there's a new one that's happening right now that, for me, is the most exciting new innovation in lupus that's happened in my entire career, which is now over 30 years, where we're taking a drug developed for cancer and applying it in rheumatology. And not only are we getting great results, but we're learning something about the basic biology of lupus and other autoimmune diseases that we didn't really know before. So new drugs come from patients and doctors understanding their and describing the illness. It comes from basic scientists in universities, working through the details of what the underlying biochemistry or cell biology of that is, and then drug developers integrating all of that knowledge into what's potentially possible in the development of medicines, and then finding the money and the time and the people to make it all happen, and then testing them. And frankly, drug development is not an undertaking for the faint of heart or the intolerant of failure, because most of the things we try actually don't work. But sometimes they do, and that's what makes it worth it.
Yeah, absolutely. I know obviously trial and error is a huge part of it, and people being willing to participate in clinical trials and be willing to donate samples, or just what the patient role looks like in that as well, can really make a huge difference in the research process and the development process.
Yeah, I want to highlight that point because it's super important. Patient and foundation engagement, particularly for rare diseases, is a cornerstone of the success for drug development in rare diseases, and lupus is a rare disease. I think many of us have heard about the JDR, the Juvenile Diabetes Foundation, or JDRF, Juvenile Diabetes Research Foundation. That's been super important for raising money and organizing patients so that the disease can be tested. The same for muscle diseases. There are foundations that have been very effective in raising money, more importantly, organizing patients so that when a new drug candidate emerges, it can be tested efficiently because there are ways to find the patients. Lupus hasn't been as effective as some of these other disease foundations, frankly. I think in part it's due to the fragmentation of the lupus foundations in our country. There are many, but each of the foundations, I think, is doing their part. Certainly we are at Lupus Foundation of New England. We provide some support to companies as they think about testing new drugs in lupus. For example, if a company will submit to us a clinical study protocol, information about the drug, we'll have it reviewed by a medical and scientific committee, and if they've had external ethics approval and we agree it's a worthwhile study, we will then communicate this to many of our patients in our database to say, hey, here's this new study, we think it's worthwhile, maybe take a look and see if you're eligible and interested.
Yeah, absolutely. I think everything that you said makes a lot of sense, and that patient engagement piece, I think, is really, it's certainly the point of Lupus Awareness Month, not just for the sort of the outside world or non-lupus patients to be aware of lupus as a disease, but also for folks with lupus to know that there is a real need for participation and I guess self-organization, and participating in clinical trials, and being willing to be part of finding treatments and a cure.
Yes, completely agree. So take a look at these studies, if you hear about them, and again, at the foundation, we're always happy to take inquiries if people have a study. We can answer the questions. We can tell you if we think it's worthwhile, and so forth. Almost all of the studies that I've seen have been worth doing. To think, what kind of things might we not recommend doing? Obviously, if we think the intervention is either inappropriately dangerous, hopefully the ethics committee would have flagged that, but we look at that too. If it's unlikely to ever be successful, for example, if they're testing something that has completely failed, and sometimes it might be worth doing, but we would call attention to the fact that, hey, maybe this is a Me Too drug, meaning maybe there are drugs that work the same way that are available now, and they're just testing another one, and maybe you would just want to go get prescribed one of the drugs on the market now, potentially. Of course, there are still reasons to test these new ones. It helps drive the price of medicines down by having more drugs with the same mechanism, and maybe this would be a way for people to access medicines who couldn't otherwise get them with inadequate insurance, for example.
Yeah, that access piece is
Yeah.
huge, and I think just continuing to refine medication and make new advancements is super important.
Mhm.
I'm curious where your I guess passion for this world comes from. Why rheumatology, why lupus research? Like, what inspired you to kind of focus on that area?
Yeah, many people in the lupus community who don't have lupus have a family member or a friend with lupus, and that's how they've come to the area. In my case, that wasn't true. In my case, right after college, I went to work in a rheumatology research lab at Brigham and Women's Hospital, and just both had a wonderful time with exciting medicine, great people, and frankly, success in the research laboratory. And I just never left. I stayed at Brigham and Women's Hospital for my entire medical education, my scientific education, and then stayed on as a faculty member until I left for industry. So I just sort of came to it that way. It was sort of an accident, but I recognized a good thing when I saw it and stayed.
Yeah, and that's great. I'm sure. I mean, obviously, you've made a lot of strides in this research, and so yeah, I want to jump to kind of the teaser that we gave at the top of this interview. This new and exciting treatment that you're really jazzed about. Tell us about it. Tell us where it's at, in stage wise, and kind of what you see it looking like. When people might be able to access it.
Sure. So this is another example. So this is the most exciting treatment that I've seen in lupus, period. It started in oncology for treating cancer, and it is essentially, how can I describe it in a simple term? Let's talk about the cell therapy first. So the therapy is called CAR T, and the way it works is T cells, which are one of a patient's immune cells, are taken out of the body and are then manipulated in the laboratory to make them destroy B cells. In the case of the cancer patients, it was destroying malignant B cells or cancerous B cells, and the normal B cells were wiped out as a side effect. In lupus, a group of doctors led by a fellow named Georg Schett in Germany took this therapy and decided to use the side effect in oncology to treat the disease in lupus and some other autoimmune diseases. So they did the same approach. They took the patient's T cells, which are an immune cell, manipulated them in the laboratory so they would attack and kill the B cells, and then put them back in the patient. And of course, the patients don't have any cancerous B cells. This therapy now just wiped out all of their B cells. B cells make antibodies. And what they found, they published a paper on the first, was a little bit more than a dozen patients. 8 of them were lupus patients just last year. So this is new. And they found that their 8 lupus patients got completely better. They all went into remission. Their ANAs went away. The fatigue went away. Everything got better. And they saw similarly nice results in myositis and scleroderma, which are 2 other autoimmune diseases. this got everybody very excited. And very quickly, at least a half a dozen other organizations, mostly companies with similar therapies, started testing it in lupus patients and other diseases. And there's both good news and bad news. So let's start with the good news first. The good news is all of these companies fundamentally replicated the results that Dr. Schett saw in his laboratory, in the sense that almost all of the lupus patients responded and got a lot better. The bad news is that they did not see 100% cures. Maybe it was 30%, maybe it was 50%. We'll see. It's very early. The paper that Dr. Schett published followed people for up to 2 years. It had only been a matter of months as we see these data replicated at the last rheumatology meeting, now six months ago or so. But the good news is it really looks like this is going to work, and for some patients it's going to be a cure. Now, the word cure is not used in oncology. They have treatment. They have something called treatment-free remissions, but we can use the C word in lupus diseases. And what we would expect is a treatment-free remission or cure means people feel well, they have no evidence of disease, you're off therapy for lupus, and it's just amazing. Not everybody gets that response, and we don't know how long it's going to last yet because it's still pretty new. But so far, some patients are lasting a long time. So why would that be? So we've learned a few new things from Dr. Schett's study and from the replication of it that's happened subsequently by various companies. Number one is we're learning that in most patients, most of the symptoms of lupus happen because of B cells and antibodies. Now, we did not know this before. In fact, there have been recent drugs approved that only target T cells for lupus. Voclosporin is one specific example. But we've learned, I think, that the bad actors are B cells and antibodies, and the role of the T cells in those cases would be to help the B cells grow. And I think that's amazing. Now, what else have we learned? We've learned antibodies can come from two different places. They can come from B cells, and they can come from a cell that is derived from B cells called plasma cells. Most of your antibodies that come from vaccines or previous infections you've had are made by plasma cells. So this therapy directed against B cells doesn't affect your immunologic memory for the tetanus shots you got, or the MMR you got, or your COVID shots, or whatever. And there's some biology that's, I guess I'm not going to go into, it's technical, but we're learning some very cool new things about the biology of how antibodies work too, from this one experiment in lupus.
Yeah, it sounds, well, first of all, that was going to be my question, like, why hasn't anybody tried this before? But it sounds like I'm not a doctor, I'm not a researcher, so I might not use the same terminology, but it sounds like we just didn't know as much information about the cells and how they were interacting until this researcher took the jump to try this new type of therapy.
That's exactly, we're learning things that we didn't know, and some of the things we thought we knew were wrong. And this experiment clarified things for us. Now, why was it tried now and not a long time ago? Well, first of all, this therapy is a relatively new therapy. It's so-called cell and gene therapy. And I think it was only approved in lymphoma, I'm going to say 7 or 8 years ago. So
Wow.
It's a pretty new therapy. That's one reason it hasn't been tried until recently. Second reason is it's super expensive. The cells have to be harvested from a patient. They have to be then purified and shipped to a manufacturing site. They're manufactured in a custom manner for each individual patient, the way this is done, and then shipped back to the hospital where the patient's going to be treated. The patient has to have a little bit of chemotherapy to accept the cells back. It's a big deal. But it's worth it now that we understand that this works. And of course, nobody's sitting down and accepting this as the only approach. Now that we know it works, there are a whole bunch of new approaches that are being done to see if we can make it cheaper, faster, safer, better, so forth.
Right. I was going to say the first step is always to sort of a proof of concept, and then scalability comes later, and the efficiency of the treatment.
Yes, and making the treatment better. So those things are happening. One of the approaches is something called bispecific antibodies, which instead of taking the cells out and teaching them how to attack B cells, you can inject something called a bispecific antibody into the patient, which then teaches the T cells what to do right in the body without the need for chemotherapy, and it's a much cheaper therapy, conceptually anyway. And that doesn't work quite as well in oncology, but it does work. So it's being tried now in lupus, and I would imagine at the ACR meeting in this fall, this year, we're going to hear the next set of data, and maybe at the EULAR meeting, which is the European Rheumatology meeting, we may hear something there too. It's an exciting time. This is new. The data are just coming out. Stay tuned. We'll see. And of course, the other approach that I'm personally involved in is, rather than taking people's own T cells and educating them in the laboratory, maybe we can take a batch of T cells and from one person grow it up, educate them, and then store those, and then give them to a bunch of people.
Yeah.
And because that would be a much logistically simpler and potentially cheaper way to do it. And so there are several companies that are testing that approach too.
Yeah, this is huge information, and I feel like this is not being talked about in the lupus community, just the different groups that I'm a part of, just doing even social media work for the foundation. So I feel like this is like a breaking news segment almost, but yeah, that's really great. And I think the hope piece is not to be undervalued, that there are people like yourself, like the researchers in Germany and lots of other places that are actively doing this work every day to try to find solutions to this very, very complicated condition.
Yeah, it's very technical, but we've talked about the potential for a cure at Lupus Foundation meetings ever since I went to my first one 40 years ago, and this is the first time I've seen it.
Yeah, so, that's amazing.
Yeah, it's happening. It's a very exciting time to be in rheumatology. Very exciting time to talk about hope and the promise for real cures, or at least super effective therapies. It's happening now.
Are you still ingrained? I mean, obviously, as a board member, you're ingrained in the lupus community, but have you spoken to any lupus folks that have lupus and, gotten their response, their feedback on this new potential treatment?
Oh, yeah. So at last year's Medical and Scientific Symposium that the Lupus Foundation of New England led, which was out in Worcester, Dr. Cariccio from UMass was there speaking about this therapy. His center is a site for one of the studies that's ongoing now. And I know there's at Mass General, there's a center as well for another company. So Dr. Cariccio talked talked to the community about this therapy, and I thought gave a nice explanation of what it was and showed some data, and so we're going to be hearing more and more about it as the data are replicated and more people are successfully treated, and we understand exactly what the options are, what kind of therapies will work, how to make them available. Figuring out how to make this cheaper is going to be important.
Yeah, absolutely. That access piece is not to go unplanned for, I guess. Yeah. Just with how inaccessible a lot of treatments are just in general with our healthcare system. And so when we're talking about life-saving or life-changing treatments, that accessibility piece is really important. Before we wrap up, I guess my last question to you is, you've shared a lot of really inspirational and hopeful data and information with us today that I think goes a long way in making people excited about the future treatments of lupus. What do you say to lupus patients that maybe don't hear this enough or are really just feeling like there's not much change in the treatments that are available to them, or are frustrated or depressed, or I don't know, they're just kind of not in a great space of feeling like there's hope for their condition?
Yeah. Well, I would first highlight, underscore, and emphasize that there is hope. In the past 5 or 6, maybe 10 years, there have been a bunch of new medicines approved for lupus. The oldest was belimumab, voclosporin, and anifrolumab. These are all therapies specifically approved for lupus. There are a bunch more in clinical trials. Remember, most things don't work. So there's a lot of doctors and scientists working with patients to come up with new medicines. This new class of medicines is amazing. There are a whole bunch of clinical studies. In fact, there's so many clinical studies running of this approach that I've just described to you that it's really hard to find patients to participate in the trials. There's almost more studies new medicines than there are patients. But that's not true, but it sometimes feels that way as we try to test our medicines quickly and make them available if they work. So I've never been more hopeful, and I'd like everybody that listens to this to feel the same way. And if you're a patient or a family member of a patient, look at the studies and see if they're appropriate for the people you know. You can find studies usually through a foundation website. If you're more technically minded, there's a website called clinicaltrials.gov that has essentially every clinical study being done in the US and many of them that are from abroad. And you can just search lupus and find them all. You might have to narrow your search terms because there will be too many if you just search with lupus. And of course, the foundation's always here as a resource for you if you want to ask more questions or want to discuss the topic. Both Beverly and Jenny at the foundation, you, Delaney, and those of us on the board and others who work with the foundation are happy to speak with you.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to share this information with us. I hope that it was as invigorating and lights a little fire inside of folks as it did with me. And so I think just becoming aware of these new treatment potentials and just the education piece, the awareness piece, that's why we're doing this interview series, is really important. So thank you, Dr. Klickstein. And if folks want to reach out to you, is there a way to do that? Should they just go through the foundation?
Yep, just go right through the foundation. There's a contact us button on the foundation website. It's just been, the whole website's just been redone. It looks great and it's easy to navigate. And we hope to hear from people.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you again, and I'm looking forward to seeing the community's response to this.
Terrific. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
All right. Bye.